Hey folks, I'm back with round 7 from the 2021 North American Open. So in this round, I was paired against Grandmaster Vladimir Akopian, who is an absolute legend, not to be confused with actually my former coach, Var Akobian, who is also an incredibly strong player. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to play against Akopian. I have studied a lot of his games, and he's a very, very strong player, longtime member of the Armenian national team. So it was great to get a chance to play against someone of this stature. Now, of course, I still wanted to win the game, and I mainly prepared the Sicilian because Akopian mostly e4 player, and we end up getting open Sicilian. Knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, and here I opted for a6. Now, mainly I'm a Taimanov player with queen to c7. But I just wanted to try something new for this game, surprise my opponent, because of course he probably prepared something in the Taimanov as well. And I feel like, the player that springs the first surprise usually gets at least somewhat of a psychological advantage in the opening. That said, the advantage didn't last for very long. So I played a6, which I don't think he was expecting, because I've never played this OTB. But he spent a little bit of time here, and he ends up going knight takes c6. Now, the point behind this move order, as far as I understand, is to not commit to queen c7 too early, and this gives black some additional options in against different variations that white can try. I still think it's very similar to a Taimanov, so I still feel very much at home here, and I'm sure in many positions black just plays queen c7 anyway and transposes, but there's kind of like pros and cons to every move order. Now, the main drawback to this one classically has been that after knight takes c6, which happens in the game, b takes c6, this move a6 is not really useful in this structure. So if we compare it to the Taimanov with queen to c7, if white were to take here on c6, then this move is much more useful for black than the move a6, because the queen wants to be on c7, and a lot of times black will just play a5 in one move anyway. That said, it's still a very playable structure, so although white gets a much better version here, compared to like the Taimanov, it's still a very, very playable position. So bishop d3, d5, castles, knight f6, this is all very standard. And here white played queen f3. So in the past, he had a couple games with queen e2 and rook e1, which are more typical, and I was prepared here. Queen f3 is kind of a new move that I remember looking at not too long ago when I was just preparing the system. But during the game, I didn't really remember exactly what my notes said, so I was pretty much already on my own here, which is kind of tough because of course my opponent probably was familiar with this position. Then we discussed after the game as well, and it turns out yes, he was he was quite familiar, whereas I had to start kind of figuring things out for myself. Anyway, I play bishop e7, which is I think the most logical move, and now white plays queen to g3. And this is kind of the point behind this early queen f3, queen g3. White hits the g7 pawn, and black can castle here and easily defend it, but then I have to deal with bishop to h6, where I'm forced to put my knight on e8. And so I wasn't actually sure about this position. Bishop h6, knight to e8, and here I'm actually threatening bishop h4, followed by e5, and white would have a hard time keeping the bishop on h6, so white has to bring the bishop back with bishop f4. And after the game, I checked, and it turns out that this was actually my notes. So I did a little bit of analysis here. There are some games, and this was kind of the way I was supposed to play. And here, black has different moves. There's like bishop b7, and I think bishop h4 is a move, and so on. So the theory certainly continues, and yeah, I think black still has to solve their problems. During the game, I wasn't really sure, and so I was just already kind of thinking on my own. To me, this position looked a little bit unpleasant, so I decided to instead play g6, which comes with its own drawbacks, because now white can play bishop h6 and prevent black from castling. But I did feel like this move is quite playable in this structure, although black does have to be really, really precise from here. So now I go knight h5, I think only move, because otherwise it's just very hard for me to develop. So knight h5 hitting the queen, and my idea is to then follow up with bishop to g5 and challenge white's bishop. And if I can trade off the darks for bishops, then I should be able to castle, and I thought I should be all right. So for example, if white plays like queen f3, bishop g5, I was kind of thinking like takes, And maybe white goes knight a4, like a very thematic move for this kind of position, hoping for like knight b6. But here black can just castle knight b6 and rook a7, for example, to keep the a6 pawn defended. Rook b8, I think, is also very possible. And yeah, basically, I think black is more or less okay. In the game, white ends up going queen g4, which is surprising, right? Because it looks like he is just kind of walking into e5 and allowing black to take a lot of space. But I realized his idea, of course, after e5 is to now play queen f3. And here I can't go bishop to g5 because the d5 pawn is hanging. So takes. I am threatening bishop g4 to trap the queen, but e takes d5, and I couldn't make this work for black because bishop g4, queen e4, white's queen just gets out. So the pawn is hanging, so I can't go bishop g5. And if I go d4, well, if the knight had to move here, then bishop g5, and I thought black was okay, but white can throw in bishop c4. And this is a very unpleasant move. So taking just loses on the spot, queen takes f7, and rook d1, and black loses the queen. So I would have to defend f7. Only way how is to play like knight f6 or maybe bishop f6, but bishop f6 also looks bad. But now after knight f6, basically I'm just stuck. White can play knight a4, and yeah, I'm not castled. My pieces aren't developed. White's playing rook a1, c3 next, and yeah, I just have no way of getting out. Okay, maybe white has to be careful about some bishop g4, but I think even that, like queen b3 is a big threat. Like, yeah, it's just just a really tough position for black. So using the power of reciprocal thinking, I realized actually I should just start with d4. Because if you remember in the previous variation, as soon as black plays d4, white gets his bishop c4 tempo. So I start with d4 to force white to move the knight, and then I'm able to get the same variation, but without running into bishop c4, or at least it's not as strong. So here white goes knight e2. He could have also played knight a4, which I was actually mainly expecting this one. And here I was going to play e5, queen f3, and bishop g5 again. Now again, white has bishop c4 in this position, but it's not nearly as dangerous because I actually have a very nice move, rook a7. And I don't have to, it's not such an awkward way to defend f7. White still has to trade on g5 here, queen takes g5, and this is actually quite okay for black. It was also possible here, instead of bishop g5, I was also considering bishop e6, just to start with this one, stopping bishop c4, and then setting up bishop to g5. And during the game, I was thinking black should be actually quite all right here, because, okay, I'm not castled, but I'm getting bishop g5, and I have a plan. My bishop is nicely developed. I have this possible f4 square for the knight. Okay, my queenside weaknesses are weak, but I feel like it's a very playable position. Instead, knight e2 happened, which definitely surprised me, like I mentioned, because knight a4 is the more thematic square for the knight. But I played e5, queen f3, and here I end up going bishop to e6, which is maybe not a bad move, but after this one, I did feel like I was under some pressure. And after the game, he mentioned that this was maybe a move he would have changed for black. So the other serious option was bishop g5, which I also considered. But basically, I didn't want to allow bishop to c4. Again, I would have to play rook a7, takes. I actually didn't think this position was so bad. And so I was thinking maybe here white continues queen a3 to stop black from castling, and then I would go queen e7. And yeah, in my mind, I felt like maybe black is a little worse. I wasn't really sure. Again, the pawns on the queen side are isolated. Yeah, white can avoid the queen trade, maybe like queen a5 or something. To me, it felt like black was a little bit worse. So that's why I kind of didn't go for this one, and instead I started with bishop to e6. But this is a serious tempo that, I don't have to play bishop g5. After the game, we discussed a bit, and he said, yeah, I should have played bishop g5 here. And basically, he thought this position was unclear, but he basically thought that black is okay. And I checked with Stockfish, and it's close to equal after something like c5. And indeed, I think it's actually not a super dangerous position for black, and actually very close to equalizing. Because I have moves. I want to castle and develop and so on. Okay, so I go bishop e6, which is not bad. But now white plays knight to g3. Which ends up being a very tricky move. So I was expecting something like c3, and then I would go c5, c takes d4, c takes d4, and white has a move here to do something like rook c1, but bishop g5 is coming, and I thought black was okay. But knight g3 actually poses some really interesting problems for black. because white wants to take on h5. If I take on g3, then I figured queen takes g3 would be the response, stopping bishop g5 and also opening up this idea to push f4, which once I've committed my center like d4, e5, these pawn breaks like c3, f4, especially f4, become white's main idea. And yeah, to me, this position looked very, very unpleasant because I'm not castling and I have no idea how to castle from here. And now f4 is coming and yeah, I don't have any nice counterplay. So I end up going knight f6 back, threatening bishop g4, trapping the queen. And also with ideas of knight g4, kicking the bishop out this way and then castling, as well as ideas of like knight d7, knight c5, which definitely a good square for the knight. The engine actually suggested bishop g5 here anyway, which I kind of just didn't really take too seriously. But after takes, knight takes h5, gh5, black structure looks really ugly, but apparently it's not so bad. At least Stockfish seems to be pretty optimistic about black's chances here, calling it approximately equal. I do have an easy plan like rook g8, king e7, h4, and I have this pressure on the g file, and it's really not so easy for white. You could also say that black has like the better bishop here. Yeah, during the game, I didn't really consider this much at all, to be honest. I just felt like, okay, king is still in the center, double pawns. I just didn't really take it that seriously. Looking at it now, it does kind of start to make sense that, yeah, black has some pressure, and it's not that easy for white to take advantage of the king on e8. Though in a practical game, I think most players would probably prefer white here anyway. That said, maybe that position was holding. I end up going knight f6, and here I was mainly expecting h3, stopping bishop g4. To me, this looked very natural. It also stops knight to g4, and then I was hoping I would have time for knight d7. And again, I was feeling optimistic because I can get bishop g5 in. I have knight c5. To me, this looked quite okay. But white ends up playing really strong move here, queen to e2, which I definitely just missed. I didn't even consider this move. I didn't really see the point until he was thinking, and then I realized, okay, queen e2 is probably on his mind. And the more I thought about this position, the more he thought about it, the more I realized queen e2 is probably going to happen. Because now white isn't really so much wanting to take on a6, although that is a pawn that could be taken at some point. Instead, white just gets out of the way of f4, which is now going to be happening and is actually pretty annoying for black. So I end up playing knight g4, hitting the bishop. I considered a lot of moves here, like knight d7, but then again f4, and I wasn't sure. Apparently this is playable. Like, I think this might have been better than what I did. Takes, and castles, something like this. And the structure is quite playable for black. I think it's a very unclear position. White can't really take with the rook, I believe, because of bishop g5. And then black kind of owns the dark squares here with the knight coming to e5. And, sometimes black can even be better with such nice pieces. So, yeah, that was definitely much better, I think, than what I did. The engine also suggests a5, which I considered, but, okay, to me it looked very slow. I didn't even think white is necessarily wanting to take this pawn. So to spend the tempo defending it in a sharp position felt strange to me. I thought even white can maybe even just go h3, doesn't even have to rush with f4. But knight d7, f4, again, it's not so bad for black. Castles, I think white is better. White has a clear advantage, but it seems to be a playable position. My idea is to go a4 here, knight c5, and yeah, white doesn't have any immediate, mating attack with knight f5 or anything like that. So knight g4, I think, yeah, I just kind of continued to go wrong. Bishop drops back to d2. Here I played h5. And I think, well, my idea here was basically just to go quite active, but it never works out. If white were to take the pawn on a6, then yeah, I get h4 and white's knight is kicked to h1, and this gives black a ton of compensation. I can go h3, for example, and force g3, which looks really ugly for white's knight, or bishop to g5. And yeah, I felt like black is getting good play here. But instead, white goes h3. And yeah, I mean, originally I was going to decide here between h4 and just going back with knight f6. I really wanted to play h4 because getting counterplay, if takes, then I thought this position looks quite interesting for black. But the problem I realized is that white is going to go knight f5. And this is a really powerful resource, because now takes, the bishop is under attack, and I got to go something like bishop d5, I thought, then queen takes g4. And I looked at this position for a bit, but yeah, I just couldn't really make it work. I'm down material. I have this G file, you know, it would be nice if I can get like queen d7 and castle and rook g8, but by the time I do everything, all of that, you know, white's just going to play like bishop e4, rook e1, queen e2, just blockade the light squares, and basically black will never get any kind of serious counterplay. And of course, my other bishop on e7 is just kind of a bad piece in the long run. So this one I think is just strategically busted for black. So I end up just retreating with knight f6. And now he just immediately played f4. It's fine. He didn't even think about it. You know, bishop takes a6 actually doesn't even work because I go h4, knight h1, and I have this move, knight takes e4, among other things, but this happens to be the strongest, and bishop on a6 is hanging, and yeah, white's pieces are all messed up. But it shows you the strength of my opponent. Like, he didn't even consider this for a moment. It just immediately goes f4, and just playing for the attack. And now it's tough. I mean, if I go h4, then f5 is going to happen. And Stockfish seems to think, okay, I can even go bishop c8. White is forced to play knight h1. And black is only clearly worse. It's like +1 here. But okay, this position looked really, really bad to me, so I decided not to play that. I end up taking on f4, which I often feel like, you kind of have to do in these positions. Bishop takes f4. And yeah, another critical moment here. I end up playing queen a5, which my opponent rightly criticized after the game. The main move we were both considering was h4 here. And okay, if white has to go knight h1, then at least black is happy. But of course, the critical move here would be e5. And if I take on g3, white takes on f6. And the problem is this bishop is hanging, of course, and white has threats of bishop takes g6. So I'm not in time to do anything here. The position is just collapsing. And after e5, if I instead go knight d5, well, then white plays knight e4 and gets a very nice square for the knight. And here, this is where I was having a hard time finding a move. I can take on f4, but then rook takes f4. Even though I have the two bishops, I'm not going to keep them for very long. The knight is coming to f6. And to me, this looked very, very dangerous. And indeed, I think black is in big trouble here. Instead, I don't think I should take the bishop on f4, but it's hard to find a good move. Maybe rook h5. During the game, I was really worried about like knight f6 check here, for example, where if I, again, take twice, then there's bishop takes g6, and this is, well, just lost for black. But the engine says I can maybe play bishop takes f6 here, and then take with the queen to defend g6 and e6. I don't think I really considered this one or even looked at it during the game just because of this detail. But okay, maybe white can't actually do anything so immediate here. Stockfish still gives white like a huge advantage here. It's like plus 1.5 or almost plus 2. But it's not like the most obvious position. The continuation is just like bishop h2, queen e7, rook a e1, and white is much better. Knight e3, rook f2. So it's not like the most clear thing ever that white is just winning here. Black is at least a pawn up, though clearly black is worse without the dark squared bishop. And so, yeah, not knowing what to do, like I can't go rook h5. Maybe I should just play like king f8 here or something, knight f6, and then just not take, because again, if I take twice, then there's going to be like bishop takes g6 stuff. Maybe just like king g7 here, bishop g5. And white is much better, but the game is definitely not over. And so, yeah, objectively, I think this is how I should have continued. And then it's still not easy for white. Like, he has to find a number of good moves to still win the game from there. So I end up going queen a5. And yeah, my idea here was at least I'm stopping this idea of e5, because then I would have knight d5. And if knight e4, then I can actually take and go queen takes e5. And here white, I don't think, has anything. But of course, the queen on a5 is not really well placed, and I'm not really solving my issues here, which is like, I'm not castled, my rooks aren't connected. And castling, of course, I should mention, was very scary because I figured white will just go e5, and on any move, just like knight takes h5. And I looked at this a little bit, but it looked like mate, so I couldn't really consider it for very long. So queen a5, I'm just trying to keep the game going because I really didn't like this position after e5 and knight e4, but unfortunately things are still bad for black. I thought white might consider knight f5 here, which is a pretty typical sacrifice, but it doesn't quite work because takes bishop d5, and if like bishop d6 and white tries rook e1 and stuff, I just go back queen d8, and I don't think white is in time to do anything here. But instead he just goes rook a1 immediately, and now knight f5 is a very big concern because both of my bishops will be hanging. So I play rook a7, not a move I want to make, but what to do? I got to defend the bishop. Castling is still way too dangerous. And yeah, now, okay, things are just quite awful here. White played a3, a really high class move, just showing black, you have no moves in the position. Like I can just go a3, b4, just like kick you around. And yeah, I think very, very simple and strong move, and black is just lost. So I tried king f8. I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about just resigning here, but I figured I should at least play a few more moves, just to try. Even though the position is bad, it's still up to white to win the game. But it's really bad, and I'm not even sure there's a good way for black to contest things here, because b4 is coming and happened. If queen takes a3, then just bishop e5 and like queen f2, and yeah, I'm losing material here. So I have to go back queen to d8. Now I play queen f2, another very nice move, and yeah, so I'm happy I didn't resign earlier, because then I wouldn't have seen this move, because I wasn't expecting this one, but it's very strong, just eyeing the d4 pawn, eyeing bishop e5, and also preparing knight e2 to win the pawn as well. And yeah, black is just completely busted here. Just nothing to do, just absolutely nothing. If h4, then this time the knight just comes back to e2, and yeah, I have no way of defending the d4 pawn in the long run. So the game ended rook d7, bishop e5, king g7, forced to defend the knight, knight e2, and I resigned here because knight takes d4 is going to come next, and then there's knight takes e6, knight takes c6, and like all my pieces are tied up defending the knight. So it's just a few more moves before black loses literally everything. So I felt like, yeah, this was probably a good time to call it. So yeah, really tough game, but I'm never upset about games like this, because I feel like I can learn a lot from going over it, and especially in terms of the structure and this opening being at least a little bit unfamiliar for me. Definitely a lot I can take away from this game. And it was really cool to talk to him afterwards. Just we briefly just discussed a few moments. He was saying that this line is like pretty interesting. But overall, it was very unclear. I think he mentioned this was the main line with castles, knight, bishop f4, and he said it was like not easy for white. And then, like I mentioned a couple times in this video, there was a few moments where he thought like here bishop e6. Instead, he thought bishop g5, and black is doing all right, which I think was correct. And then later on, he was very critical of queen a5, which I think was also spot on, because after queen a5, it was very easy for white in this position. But this one, h4, e5, knight d5, knight e4, although black is definitely worse here, the game still continues, and white would certainly have to find a number of good moves to convert it. So yeah, I'm always happy when a strong player is willing to discuss after the game, because of course they don't really owe you anything. They could just say like good game and then just keep quiet and not share any secrets. But no, it was definitely very helpful to hear a few of his thoughts after the game. So I was very appreciative of that. And generally, when I play lower rated player, I do try to at least give them some tips if they ask me after the game, where did they go wrong or what have you. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this one. So I'm still on 4.5 now out of 7. 2 more rounds to go. So the tournament is still going to be very much up in the air. If I do well in the final 2 rounds, could be a good event. If I don't do well, unfortunately, it might not go my way. But yeah, hopefully I do well, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.